Hello, welcome to my stream today. Today I wanted to talk about, I think, just a few topics that I've been thinking about and discussing for ages now, and they just happened to come up this week. So this is kind of more of a topical episode more than others. I honestly might not even have that much content. It might be a shorter stream than usual. I've been super busy. I've been working on 3 speaking engagements that I have coming up in the next couple weeks, and been doing some work on trying to bring like an isomorphic streaming GraphQL client to Marco. Between everything, it's just been like super busy, especially with everything that's been going on this week. So, yeah, if you're here, come say hi in the chat. Hello, the new brand. Just going to ramble a little bit, but that actually does kind of tie into the topics this week. I'm literally going to use my Twitter feed to kind of spawn this whole episode. So if there's stuff that's related, or you want to talk about, get into the discussion, definitely use the chat, ask questions. That's what it's here for. I have a feeling this stream more than others will probably depend a lot on participation, but it's also probably the least. I'm not covering a specific topic that people are interested in, so I'm not sure that as many people are going to log on this week. But we'll see. If I just keep rambling, people tend to come. But yeah, maybe it's time to talk about this week in JavaScript. And yeah, there's definitely been a few things, and really, as this whole stream came about because of that. I wasn't sure if I was going to stream today, but thankfully there was enough content just from what's been going on. So yeah, this for me, this week started almost immediately after the stream last week, and I was like, oh man, I wish I had a chance to address this. Kyle Shevlin asked the question, what makes two-way binding suddenly okay? I remember part of the success of React was the rejection of two-way binding and the bugs and confusion that came with it, favoring one-way data flow. The verbosity is a feature, not a bug. And we're going to talk about this a bit more later, but this is kind of what spawned the whole idea to talk about the stream, because I agree with him. I was there, and I remember React kind of came in almost to save us. And even though it was a problem, people didn't really acknowledge it. But things have changed, and every time you kind of go through these cycles, you got to kind of look again and see if the rest of the world has changed. It's very easy for us to kind of stand on our high horses and be like, we've already figured everything out. Got to keep your mind open to the possibility of change. But yeah, I'm not going to talk about this one yet. I just wanted to say this was like a perfect cap off to the week. Obviously, this week in Solid 1.20 came out. This big release. I've been working on a lot of stuff around the reactivity and playing around, and I'm really happy that we were able to bring in native support for custom renderers. This will enable like iOS or app or Android app development, kind of like possibly native script or WebGL or Canvas terminals. Honestly, there's so much stuff this enables. And the best part about it is I don't know how all those systems work, but now that the tools are out there, there's the potential of people building stuff. I did last stream, as you if you were watching, take the custom renderer from Solid here and actually run it through JS framework benchmark with like the most naive DOM implementation I could come up with. And it scored well, about as well as Inferno. We didn't have Inferno on the list, so I'm only guessing, but we came out well ahead of Svelte, just with something very naive. So I'm pretty enthusiastic. I think this will be really powerful, really performant, especially compared to other solutions in this space, given how performant the reactivity is. So if this is your thing, please come check it out. I really want to see what people build with this. Yes, Next.js. This is probably big news for most of you. Next 12 came out, and I don't know. I've always been a little bit, what's the term? Opposite of bullish, sluggish on Next. It's Vercel huge fan. I think it's awesome how they've built the whole company around this, the deployment, and they have this full storing pipeline, and everything they do makes the process easier and makes it easier for people to get involved with. Next.js, on the other hand, has been a challenge for me because I'm a performance hound, and basically it's always what ends up on the butt of my, sort of the end of my things. It's like, like essentially I do these comparisons, and next is like the slow option or the big option. So sometimes, I'm a little bit skeptical or harsh on some of, aspects around performance, but they really delivered this time. Edge computing with streaming is what I've been waiting for, right? This is really the, how should I put it? The, like, everything that I've been working towards. This is how you leverage it. Obviously, the secret here is they're using Cloudflare under the hood, but we have the ability now to do some amazing things. And I told you this week was busy. I was trying to do other stuff, but when I saw the next example with React and 18 and the streaming, I was like, you know what? We can do this demo. We can do this demo. We can blow this demo out of the water. And that's why, obviously, I dropped everything I was doing to get this demo out. If you haven't seen it yet, it's pretty cool. Obviously, it's just Hacker News. Everyone's seen Hacker News, but it's small, it's fast, it's got streaming, it's got everything you want. Super good page performance, load scores. I wasn't even trying to kind of draw people's attention to this, but yeah, I mean, this is kind of, I mean, it's a simple app, but this is kind of the epitome of the best you can do with a single page framework right now. And I was mentioning I was working on Marco, right? And working on this, sorry, where is it? Working on this kind of isomorphic GraphQL streaming renderer. And I kind of made this post maybe a little bit out of frustration, but essentially, oh, sorry, I missed this question under the question here. Wait, do you say they're using Cloudflare under the hood? Yeah, I wasn't actually perfectly clear on this, but when I posted my example, I mean, besides the APIs being very similar to Cloudflare, when I posted my example here, not this quote, sorry, just let's look at the responses here. So good, want to try deploying to the workers directly? And I was like, wait, that's what kind of tipped me off. Someone was like, would it be that different? That kind of tipped me off that they were using Cloudflare, because essentially he was wondering, like, just avoid Next and use Cloudflare. And the truth of the matter is, Sunil, he's a former React Corp team member, and obviously he works at Cloudflare now. He hadn't realized that I already did this exact same demo on Cloudflare 8 months ago, right? But yeah, I would take this to be a confirmation of that. It makes sense too. Most streaming platforms do not support, most cloud services don't support streaming. It's unfortunate, but like AWS doesn't, and like Netlify, I believe, is on AWS, so that's a challenge. And I don't know what Vercel was using, like what their network is, but they didn't support streaming. Cloudflare was the first and maybe the only one on the serverless side. Other platforms is kind of hit or miss. I don't think Heroku supports streaming. There's very few, so obviously very aware when we come across a platform that supports streaming. Right. And that's the thing I was mentioning. Vercel cares about performance, and at least in their tooling, as I said, Next.js sometimes is a bit of a contradiction for me, but generally speaking, they've invested hard in it. They brought the guy who created a SWC on board, and basically, like they're trying to improve their Webpack. Like they're working really hard to make the builds fast. I mean, obviously it's important when you do static generation, but they're really trying to allow you to make the web period faster, like be faster at making the web. So really good. Probably, I've covered this in 2 separate streams. I'm not sure if I should cover it again. It's a little bit complicated, but I mean, people did ask. I will say that this came up on the Twitter threads a whole bunch, mostly that, yeah, I mean, this is a tricky thing to explain, but maybe one angle that I can talk about is why edge computing is a big deal here, because when you stream, all it is, like, all HTML can be streamed out. The streaming that we're talking about, the one that, like, the frameworks are making a big hype about, is this out of order streaming where you can start rendering your page, and while you're rendering your page, you start fetching your data, and you're already sending the page to the head, right? You're already sending the head of the page, and it's starting to fetch JavaScript, and it's, maybe you send the footer and the links are available, and you show a placeholder, and then as your data finishes loading, you keep on streaming more of it in, and the page kind of constructs itself. And the reason this is such a big deal is because the alternatives are so poor. I mean, Solid kind of cut its teeth in this kind of industry based on how poor the other options were, right? The way people often implement them. Obviously, client side isn't always poor, and that's what I was doing with Solid. If you just, send the static content and then have your JavaScript make your requests and fetch on your page, that's not too bad. But there's a delay. You have to go to the server, get your page loads, page requests the JavaScript, get the JavaScript, load, parse the JavaScript, execute it. At that point, fetch the data. You can do some stuff to kind of speed that up, right? Like, especially, some like preload tags and stuff. But let's face it, you're still not removing the round trips. And yes, that JavaScript waterfall is going to happen. I mean, people talk about HTTP 2 and push, but that's not going to solve what you need here, because you're just basically giving up caching. That's not that's not going to work. And Chrome team's already kind of like deprecating it. People are surprised by this, especially the back end, because they've been like, yes, HTTP 2, and they've been working out towards this stuff. Front end is just like, But on the other hand, with streaming, you still get that immediate page load. Like, you fetch the page and it comes right away, except at the point you fetch the page, that's when you start requesting. You don't have to wait for the JavaScript to come. You don't have to wait for the page to come and then for the JavaScript to come, then to start your request. You're just requesting your data right away. And once your data loads in, you just send it along with everything else, right? And what's great about this is there's no latency up front, and you basically get the same kind of loading experience as the client side. It's as if your front end APIs on the client are closer to you. Like, that's what it feels like, because you remove that latency. But the other side, the traditional thing that Next.js has always done, and SvelteKit and Zapper and Nuxt and all of them, was wait to render. They go to the server, then they fetch all your data, then they start the render, and then when they finished rendering, then they would send it. And then at that point, they request the JavaScript, and then it goes, and it comes back, and then you hydrate. And as it turns out, on a fast network, or you're in the edge and you're close and stuff, what kind of the way it tends to turn out is a client-side rendering beats that. That's how Solid was, smashing those early benchmarks, because they'd have these server-side things, and Solid's like client-side rendered demos would be smaller because they require less JavaScript, because usually hydration costs a bit more, and they just render faster because there's no blocking. Now, if you go the opposite way and you really slow down your network, well, you are on a slow network or device, it completely changes. Client-side is terrible, like just horrendous, like seconds slower. Like, that would never fly for any company that has to, deal with customers with shoddy networks or slower devices. It's so bad. Whereas, server-side rendering is a huge benefit. But the funny thing is, in those cases where the network's so slow, streaming might take a while to kind of load stuff back, but all it means is that the server is done by the time you're still kind of sending stuff over. So streaming still ends up being about just as performant as waiting for it to render in those cases. So basically streaming is the best on both ends and throughout the whole spectrum. It's just better across the board. The key part, and the reason I wanted to bring up the edge, is you notice the benefit the faster you can get the static or the synchronous content to the end user. So when you put it on the edge, like a CDN or something, they get that page immediately. It has all that Jamstack type benefit, except you get to load the data right away. So, and because of the out of order placeholders, that's where you get the benefit from the loading more. Like obviously, if the database is fast, you'll see Brian LaRoche on Twitter go on and on about his 9 millisecond database. Like I'm sorry, that's awesome, but people have different data sources, different world. I've never lived in a place where I just do 1 9 millisecond query and I'm done. There's different services, communications, some waterfalls on the server. It's not just like 9 milliseconds and you're done. But in that case, sure, you don't need streaming. But in pretty much any other case, or pretty much every case, you get, if there's database latency, that's where streaming makes the biggest benefit. People get that, they get the page content sooner, they see the loading indicator. It's all the stuff that you benefit from client-side rendering. But interestingly enough, because of it being HTTP and HTML being sent over the wire, you still get the kind of benefit from just native browser behavior. And in the case of something like Marco, which has partial hydration on top, you actually get the partial hydrate through the stream. You don't need JavaScript to render your asynchronous code. So this just lets you ship even less JavaScript. You can have this beautiful kind of almost client-side feeling loading experience with 0 kilobytes of JavaScript. So streaming is a big deal, and I've been emphasizing it a ton. So when people ask the question, sure, I'll answer it again because I think it's that important. But that's a big part of Solid's solution here, and why I knew when I made this demo that it's a great showcase for Vercel, and it's a great showcase for Solid. Oh, okay, little spiel there. But anyways, what I was getting to was that, unless anyone wants to talk a little bit more about streaming, I mean, it's a great topic. It's one of my favorite topics. I talk about it all the freaking time. But yeah, I mean, other solutions are going to get there. And honestly, I'm not sure if this is what you're referring to, but there was a kind of follow-up, which was with what's his name? Sorry, Rauch, the founder, the CEO of Vercel. He actually saw this tweet today and actually started retweeting it, pumping it up again. And he actually was like, well, people were wondering about SEO and bots, and I think he had a great response. They've been working on better bot detection, and this is the key. This is why I when I first saw this approach and suspense and putting all the pieces together about 2 years ago, and I immediately went and implemented it in Solid. And I actually explained it here. This model is the universal server-side rendering model. If you support streaming and use this kind of suspense-like patterns, you can basically write your code in a single way, and it works in all cases. You can render synchronously and have the client, fetch, behind suspense. You can render async and wait for everything before you send it, or you can use streaming and get kind of in the middle, right? And what's beautiful is for something like a bot or something that can, where they can detect it here, they can field a request and go, oh, it's a bot. I'm going to wait to send it with no JavaScript. So I'm not going to do streaming. I'm just going to let it wait. And the bot will still be happy. Like, who cares about a couple hundred milliseconds or whatever, right? Or, you can get that immediate responsiveness with streaming when it's an end user. I think that's amazing. And that's what he really highlighted here. Tools like this are going to be kind of built in, because that switch is something that Next can just build into its own platform. You don't need much to it. right? You guys are great. Thank you for that. Maybe, yeah. Yeah, I mean, hopefully the funniest thing, and I know it's largely because Rich hasn't been able to work on it. Solid Start and even SvelteKit have been really delayed. You know, there's a lot of details to work out. Making meta frameworks are hard. There's a reason there's so many people working on this stuff, right? And you know, like why Guillermo has like, I don't know, like millions and millions of dollars, and I don't know how big his team is, but like there's a lot of people working on Next.js. But yeah, I mean, I have no clue what Rich is doing. He suggested it would be Svelte related in one of his comments, but I mean, he could also be just kind of playing up that. I mean, I have to imagine for him to leave New York Times, there a pretty good opportunity opened up to him. It's tricky. I'm sure in his position he gets lots of opportunities. I'm not even in you know, that position or even close, and people are always approaching me. Obviously, I love what I do at eBay. I think it's like cutting edge and some of the, you know, the best innovation happening in the front end right now. But you know, there's always options when you have something like this. People who want to leverage the framework want to see what they can do. Yeah, I mean, if we could get him, we could definitely do it. You know, what's next for Solid? Oh, geez. I mean, I want to keep on working on this SSR story, Solid Start. I want to make it easier. I'm, you know, after this good demo with Vercel, I actually, Guillermo reached out to me, so I've been talking to Vercel a bit, just seeing what we can do to make this integration better. You know, we've been working with, you know, Netlify, make deployment easier. I think that's the next step, like making it easier to get apps out there, to, you know, get people started. And I think the deployment story is a big part of it. That's why we've been so interested in this. Early on, we kind of got Cloudflare to help us, obviously with hosting, but we were big fans of Cloudflare. Netlify jumped on, and as I said, Vercel loves what we've been doing too. So I think this is a big part of the story. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. It's very low, almost 0% chance that these are things that I would be working on myself. There's so many core type things based on the web platform that would take priority for me. I really just wanted to open the door. If, you know, there's members of the core team working in different areas, and there's potential there, but there's so much core stuff. You know, the core team's been working on documentation, been working on debug tools, been working on the website, been working on you know, Solid Start in the router, that kind of side of things. This is a whole other undertaking. I obviously I'm excited, but the thing with this is an area that takes specialty, and I don't know if, I mean, there's people around the ecosystem, great with 3D, great with different areas. They could probably leverage a specialty, but this is not. That's me. I know the web, and I'm working on that. So maybe this will come, but probably not from me. Right. So it's funny. I was trying to get somewhere before this, but it's good. The chat keeps things flowing. There's a lot of good stuff that's been happening this week between the streaming and the release. So I welcome those questions. Where I was going though was streaming is a big deal. I did the streaming demo, and I was working to Marco with the streaming and trying to get GraphQL to work. And I was like, oh my God, no library today actually supports this. I was like, okay, React 18's out the window, coming out soon. Next.js is making all the, you know, noise, the hype, and you can tell, you know, the work is getting done. And I'm right on board. Been working on stuff with Solid to kind of improve the performance and kind of get things there. And I go to try and implement GraphQL, and I just come to the stark realization that, you know, like the SSR exchanges or links or whatever, I'm talking URQL, all of them, you know, and even the way we handle head metadata, CSS and JS, all that kind of stuff is not where it needs to be for streaming the work. They assume that you just collect all the resources at the end and stick them in the head. And that's not, you know, that's not bad in a sense, but it's doubly compounded. That side is awkward, but even more awkward is on the client, they expect the stuff to be there before you start doing any work, right? Like a perfect GraphQL, generally, they have these normalized caches that are these big blobs, and you do all your queries, and they're like, okay, we got all the data. Now we're going to send the page with all the data, and they expect it to be there so that when you run the queries, when the page starts up, you don't overfetch or refetch again. And I think, that makes sense and that's reasonable. But in streaming world, that sucks, because if you can't hydrate until you have all the data, and you can't have all the data until the whole page is loaded, you are blocking something. It basically negates the whole benefit. And particular awkward with Marco, which has partial hydration, the ability to eliminate most JavaScript on the client, to have this kind of weird dilemma. So I was really hoping, I was like, okay, well, React's coming out, people got to be working on this. And as it turns out, they aren't. And a lot of library authors were genuinely surprised by this. And this is what kind of kicked up the heat a little bit, because they were like, oh, I didn't know I'd have to do anything about this. There is the React 18 working group where they're talking about it, but essentially most people were actually in the dark. They didn't even realize how big of a change this was. And most of the industry is kind of moving on, not even caring about this a little bit. Like Remix Run, I'm a huge fan of Remix. Like the routing solution, their ability to, how should I put it? Like, do kind of use the route to fetch the data and stuff. Like this is the same stuff that I've been building. Those guys are on it. But I went and asked them about streaming after I saw their post, because they were like, oh, our kind of superpower is because we know the route, we can fetch all the data ahead and then render your page. And I'm like, but what about streaming? And they're like, no, we don't believe in suspense. And I'm like, I mean, that's fine, but like it's just cutting off that whole angle, right? You have to architect your app with that kind of consideration, right? Solid it definitely considers streaming. And I think it's just important to kind of understand the impact and the implications of those kind of decisions. And we drew out the big guns with this one. Dan Abramoff came on this, and honestly, as everyone who knows me and the way I guess about React, I'm a huge Dan Abramoff fan. I think for someone maintaining such a large use framework and must get like people like, I know from even supporting Marco at eBay and like in those environments, and I know the open source, like it's hard to maintain even libraries at a certain size with enough user base and supporting them and being positive and all this. Dan always takes the time to answer the questions and always keeps calm and keeps to the point, and he came in and he was like, look, we know this is going to be tough. We don't want necessarily to kind of get ahead of ourselves on the documentation. We're engaging specific integrations, and we're going to, we've talked about what we're going to do in our working groups here. And, we're going to make sure that we find good solutions with key partners. And then once we got that worked out, we can kind of extend that out to the rest of the ecosystem, maybe not through documentation, maybe through other means. Even, this is a great thread if you want to check it out. Like Rachel Neighbors, who's in charge of React's documentation, got in by the end. You kind of get this idea of the challenges. Like at one point, Dan's talking about like there's different ways to look at this, right? There's the migration story, and then there's the greenfield story. And basically, from that perspective, we have to kind of attack this in two different phases. And I think this is really quite powerful, to kind of hear it from him, how they're actually doing this. I'm trying to find, if I can find the actual thread. It's so hard with Twitter when things kind of get into this zone. But essentially, that's great. But that sucks for me, right? It means that no library out there is going to actually be doing this stuff right now, and it's probably going to be months until after React 18 comes out that we have solutions here. So as usual, with this is not a new story for Marco. I'm obviously newer on the dev side, and this is one of the first bigger tasks that I'm doing solo. But yeah, you can understand that This is basically the history of Marco, 8 years. Every time it's like, oh, there's this cool thing, let's do it. Oh no, we don't support anything that's helpful for you. Well, would you? No, that's kind of the thing. Now that React's getting in the zone, and others are going to feel the kind of pain of this because, it is different, right? It's funny, even stuff like SSR, everything that the ecosystem is going through right now, Marco went through 5-6 years ago, but they did it alone and had to kind of come up with their own solutions. So I'm glad things are catching up, but it is definitely, still a challenge, even in this day and age. So yes, this was a little bit of my frustration thread, but I'm glad it kind of alerted some people to things. People asked legitimate questions, and I'm hoping this keeps the conversation going and maybe directing people to the right place. Yeah. So there's my little spiel about streaming and React. As I said, it's always great to hear what they're thinking or working on. Dan actually gave a few really cool insights that they're actually talking about head tags, like things to manage the hard parts of streaming for you. They're really committed. And I think it's pretty clear. I know, Evan, you actually had a tweet this week where he's like, don't call React just a library. That ship sailed a long time ago. Yeah, clearly, if they're the type of orchestration and stuff needs a framework. I know there's some people trying to attack this from a framework agnostic way. Great example is, Brillout's name, Vite plugin SSR, little plug there. He's really dedicated to trying to unify and come up with a framework agnostic way. In a sense, people who work on web components are also kind of do that. I think that's great. I think it's really cool to see if we can kind of unify things and save the work. I also think that generalization also kind of balances out. So it's like if a specific target, the work amount is 1x, generalizing it is probably going to make the work 4x, but it saves the duplication of the 4 people doing it. So once you get it wide enough, maybe the payoff's there, but there's other challenges there in that. I think Astro, which I kind of talked about a couple streams ago, might be the most successful project I've seen being framework agnostic. Obviously bundlers and build tools are, but to a degree, but even then, like even with Vite, we had to kind of fight a little bit for some of the templating and all that. But Astro has done an amazing job. Mostly that their concept is so simple, and they got the dodge routing because they're an MPA and there's static generated MPA. Even server rendered MPA would probably be fine, but routing is the framework. I had a whole stream about routing, and I think it's super important to kind of recognize that, like, everything else, at least for a single page app, spawns from it. Like, that's why a single page app is a single page app, because of the routing, the client side routing. So I think I think once you kind of get into that mindset, it's easy to understand why being agnostic is hard. That kind of communication does differ between different rendering approaches, different technologies, right? As much as people working on these want them to kind of unify, like even things down to update model and communication makes such a big difference. For a concrete example, in a VDOM library or even a lit, when you go to a new page, you just call render, right? Like you just go, oh, new page render. If you go to the same page with different URL parameters, you just call render again. But like a fine grained library like Solid, you don't. You actually have to update the reactive signals. And it's the same kind of thing with a component update model versus a fine grained. I've hit these kind of obstacles the whole time since I started. Maybe that's why I'm pessimistic on it. But the thing is, it's how should I put it? Even those kind of agnostic solutions still have a optimal point. They still have the thing that they're trying to build. To me, it looks a lot like the 15th standard. We have 14 standards. Let's fix that and make a single standard, and you just end up with the 15th standard. It's basically that kind of scenario all over again, because there's the thing that fits their mental model. There's always assumptions that are there, and as I said, it's a valiant effort, but you can always optimize better for the specific case. So it's definitely a challenge. Okay, that's my little spiel on that. I'm sure I can talk much more on that, but let's continue on with the stream. What's it? How are we doing? 35 minutes in so far? People still there? Yeah. Once you get me talking, you know. But yeah, so let's see if we can kind of turn this around and get back to where I was trying to start from, which was talking about two-way binding, which was kind of the start of this week. And actually, I can probably look through this thread to find what I'm looking for next. But yeah, let's throw up that banner. This helps me editing later, but this is officially starting our conversation on two-way binding. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm probably not going to find it here. I read this article this week, and it goes, "How Svelte makes two-way binding safe." This article tells a pretty decent story. It looks at Angular and then looks at Svelte and explains how Svelte's two-way binding isn't like crazy unperformant the way Angular was. But in my honest opinion, this article misses the point. Actually, the actual nuanced take of it, because again, I feel, how should I put it? I feel because of my experience with fine-grained reactivity and with Knockout.js, I have a very unique perspective. Knockout wasn't, how should I put it, unpopular back then, but it still wasn't like an Angular or React. A lot of people went from like Backbone to Angular to React. They went like kind of like on this train, and they never tried some of the smaller options. And fine-grained reactivity was always different. And honestly, it hit different problems at different points. And the thing, in my opinion, like two-way binding is worse like the worst place for two-way binding out of all technology and approaches is with fine-grained reactivity. That is like that's the place where two-way binding is at its absolute worst. And that's why when I read this article with Svelte and why it's safe, and and the whole Angular thing, it wasn't about direct performance. He details how with two-way binding, essentially, like Angular runs these kind of dirty checking top-down digests, and you kind of it basically got really inefficient. Let me see if I can actually paraphrase find the exact quote there, right? What is one-way binding? Everyone does one-way binding. Yeah, two-way binding, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Okay, so where was the thing? With traditional two-way binding, you don't really have a way to know when the value is updated. So it becomes difficult to make sure that any state derived from it actually up to date. Angular 1 has a digest watcher that reruns the whole template expression in the component when something might have changed. And yes, it does all the performance problems. See, this sucks, but I'll tell you something else. Two-way binding in reactive libraries was really bad too, and it didn't rerun everything. It only ran exactly what changed. Like that part was still the same as solid. Like that. These technology approaches that we use today have existed for like a decade. And it's always interesting to me, as I said at the beginning, to notice what fundamentally has changed when things come around, because sometimes they have changed, other times they haven't. So I guess the question ultimately is two-way binding safer in Svelte? It is. Yes. Two-way binding is safer in Svelte. And two-way binding is safer in probably most frameworks. But I'm still a partial skeptic unless certain conditions are met, right? How should I put it? Like Svelte's two-way binding is safer, and I'll talk about why in a minute. how's the quality doing? Have we jumped back up? I know my internet isn't always perfect, but I hope other than a few dips, we're okay. And similarly, upcoming Marco's two-way binding is also safer in the same way. But maybe we should just start with what is dangerous about two-way binding, right? And this is possibly, maybe for some people, this is going to be kind of esoteric. Does safe refer to performance? Exactly. That's the thing. You can still be performant in a system and it not be safe, at least by my definition. Obviously, performance is a big part of it, and this is why I felt this discussion sort of missed the point. Sorry, let's hide some of these. So, what's dangerous? Let's start with what's dangerous about two-way binding. Well, first of all, in our simple case, like binding to a form field, it is not bad. Like, let's face it, the values can't go anywhere. They're localized. When you're like, here's an input and you can bind both ways to it, there's no problem there. And honestly, that's not a bad feature to have, and you can kind of build specialized form libraries to do that in React or Solid or whatnot, and that's why I wasn't terribly concerned with that part. There's a question about controlled and uncontrolled, which I think is actually more relevant, and that is when you step the next level up. But what makes two-way binding dangerous is the same reason that functional programmers consider mutability dangerous. Steve, why do I even have to talk? I got Dylan here. This is, yeah, predictability, interception, performance. Yeah, these are kind of qualities you want. So from that perspective, old frameworks had a strike against them right from the beginning. Like they mentioned Angular's digest system, which is kind of like was like, oh, we're running everything again. We have no clue what's going on. Earlier reactive systems didn't have batching. And like they could sometimes, you could just kind of infinite loop it a bit, and just wait for the system to settle, and the performance would be kind of poor, but no one would really notice. You just accidentally subscribe to something somewhere, and maybe then reuse that function somewhere else. The biggest challenge to me, kind of to show off the dangers of two-way binding, is that almost all the situations to kind of display where it's bad are like really bad or convoluted, but they're the kind of things you hit in real code bases. So if I had more time to prepare, I would have actually come up with some terrible ones for you to kind of see, but we can still play with it a little bit and get a feel for it, right? The biggest one come down to, though, losing track of what causes updates. And the biggest culprit of that, in my opinion, at least for fine grain, are proxies and nested reactivity. And like, let me just open like I don't really need a playground or anything. I'm just going to code editor to kind of show what I'm talking about here. You've seen someone kind of go like, oh, it could even be const, doesn't matter. Like my thing equals, it's like an object, with some stuff on it, right? Here's some stuff, right? And we've seen it, and then you go function my thing. And then you're like, okay. Like, does my thing like this is the like classic example of people talking about the whole mutability versus immutability problem, right? If your data is mutable, you don't even know if stuff is even on that object anymore. Where immutability gives you that guarantee. And the challenge with that is there's like if people don't obey a contract, and similarly we have this problem with let's use solid here as an example. I definitely have the means to do terrible stuff if you want to, right? It starts with something called create mutable. If you want to do bad stuff with solid, just start with this one. Create mutable store. Yeah, okay. And what am I doing? You know what? Screw this. Let's just go back to, it'd be easier for me to start from a template that exists. Yeah, there we go. Let's just go for create mutable and store and whatever. Now we, instead of a signal, let's use create mutable. Okay. And I mean, this is just the analog of our previous example, right? We have stuff with some stuff on it, you know. This stuff isn't good enough though. We need like an array maybe, and then maybe in that array maybe a user, maybe a first name. Like I need to make this like much deeper, and like, you know, it could be a store. This isn't immune to just, you know, simple stuff here, but yeah, this doesn't return an array. This returns just my thing, right? And if we pass my thing to, you know, whatever, child 1 or whatever, like I don't care how many child deeps we go. We just go my thing equals my thing, you know, and let's make child 1. But at a certain point, yeah, child 1. And some people probably still, even after I do this example, because it's not convoluted enough, will still probably be like, well, whatever. And then this is child 2, and sorry. But this is just, where were we? Let's go stuff. And it's, what is it? Let's go props dot my thing dot stuff 0. And then let's just copy this again for child 2, essentially. And maybe like it's hard to even make this convoluted enough. Like maybe like with just a simple example, but maybe what do we got? Like s equals props dot stuff. Let's create an effect that does something with prop stuff, and I don't really care what this is. I mean, my point is, at a certain point through this whole process, I'm missing some. Maybe this isn't even nested enough. Maybe I need a address on it and street. You know, and Jones Avenue. Like what I'm trying to get to is, at a certain point you're doing something here, and s dot and you know, I can't even like address. We use constant stuff, and this is one of the things that might have changed since back in the day. But like,
you could be doing some kind of calculation here, and if you're okay with mutability, in your coding patterns and stuff, you might end up accidentally doing something where you actually assign street to some temporary value, temp street, and then like I don't know the operation. Maybe you're swapping some rows. Like what I'm getting at here is, at a certain point, do you know that this assignment's going to cause your whole tree to re-render? Or you're going to cause some butterfly effect over in like somewhere else completely in your app. Because someone, like, this thing is bad because someone might actually assign this address to a different variable. Maybe they're like, okay, temp address equals this, right? And then they pass it as a prop to somewhere else. Like, I'm hoping I'm doing a decent job of explaining this, because guess what? Temp address street equals temp street is still going to go change everything else somewhere else in your app. Like, this is obviously localized. I probably should have done this maneuver in child 1 or something. And this is two-way binding, the bad part. And the truth of the matter is, Solid doesn't really protect you from this that much. I mean, it does, because I tell you to use create store, but in general, people can just kind of use create mutable and going to go ham. Vue has the exact same problems, but it can protect you a little bit because it has a VDOM. So even if everything re-renders, a bunch, it's not that bad. It just diffs. But in Solid, if everything re-renders, we create real DOM nodes. So the downside of being so performant is we have less safety nets, and that's a big part why I've never gone that way with Solid. But there's other ways to build safety nets. Nested reactivity, non-localized assignment, very, very bad. Okay. But what about, so Vue can do this and it's pretty bad. Solid can do this and it's pretty bad. Solid tries to make you not do it. Vue is there to be easy, so it's probably not that bad, But Svelte and Marco protect you from this. And the way they protect you from this is actually really, really quite simple for the most part. Is you can't just pass through deeply nested reactive values. Like, I went a little bit crazy here, but the truth of the matter is, if this props, I pass the stuff thing through, I can't reassign props stuff because it's been passed down one way. Like, this example is broken, but if I tried to go prop stuff equals something new, it's not going to work because it's one way. The problem with two-way binding, or sorry, not two-way binding, the problem with nested reactivity to like this is it even goes past two-way binding. You can actually kind of get around two-way binding because your objects can be nested inside objects inside objects. That's even arguably more dangerous than two-way binding. Someone asked me a while ago if I could figure out how to make Svelte's reactivity work cross-template without using stores. And I did. I figured out how to add proxies to Svelte in such a way that it used Svelte's template reactivity instead of stores to actually cause updates across template. But it broke things in the exact same way I'm talking about here, because updating it would cause the parent to re-render. And I mean, I can actually probably, let's see, where do they hide this stuff? Where's bookmarks? I can probably show you this. Yeah, check this sucker out. I actually made a proxy implementation. This is kind of silly because I'm reassigning state to make it trigger, but essentially
with this proxy implementation here that I'll show in a second, I could make something stateful in Svelte, like a deep nested proxy, and then even call changes that weren't part of the template. Like if we'll talk about this when we do, we'll talk about this a bit more later when we do we look at the REPLs and look at the way different frameworks work. But in Svelte, if you pull an assignment out of the template, they don't know it can change. Even if you pull it out, they basically have no way of knowing. And that's part of their safety net, because literally for something to change, the assignment has to happen in the same file. Binding kind of gets a little bit away from that, but it's shallow. It's literally just that value. You have to rebind it again. You can't get away from this, right? And that's part of where the protection comes in. The compiled frameworks like Marco or Svelte don't give you true nested reactivity. There's semi-performance trade-offs in certain scenarios there, but there's also performance gains because there's less complexity to deal with, like subscriptions at runtime and stuff. So like it's a wash. I think it depends, like unless you're trying to do something really complicated, but then again, if you need it, you can like this example is forced with the state equals state, but I was playing with some Marco tag variables with proxies, and you can get nested reactivity or something like it if you want to. You just got to make a proxy. So it's not like it's out of the table. It's just the default is set up in such a way that it's actually hard to abuse it, and that's the key point here. Yeah, I'm going to show this example a bit more later. So that's a bit of like the terrible side, and then a little bit on like the protection. I don't know if the protection makes sense yet. We might have to dig in a bit more, but essentially, I think when we look at Svelte, we'll do that. But let's look at the positive sides of two-way binding first. I took Vue's playground example and remade it in every single framework that had an online REPL. So not React, but I've got Solid here, I got Vue here, I got Svelte here, and I got Marco. And I thought it would be fun to kind of compare the code, kind of look at stuff a bit. We're going to talk about two-way binding and stuff during the rest of this, but I would say this is now switching over to our next segment here, which I'm calling REPL Diving. This is kind of a bit fun because it's awesome these days to see the use of compilation in JavaScript frameworks and kind of see how opinions differ and how you can do different stuff. I'd love to have React in here too and kind of play around with it because it's like the missing link here. But being able to just have an example and just go through these REPLs. Myself and Dylan, who's in the chat, and Michael, who's also in the marketing team, we spend a lot of time in these things because you're designing something. You're like, well, how does that work in that language, or how did they approach it and stuff? And this is an invaluable tool. Some of you might remember I did a tweet on Twitter, maybe I'd say almost a year ago now, where I compared the effects and stuff and the different timings of the console log and the reactive systems. And that was based on one of those sessions that myself, Michael, and Dylan were doing while we were designing the next version of Marco. We're like kind of surprised. We went there and we realized that every framework had different behavior, and we're sitting there going, which one's the best? What makes sense? I don't have this example right now in front of me, unfortunately, although I could probably dig it up if I really tried. Actually, I don't have to try that hard. I'm 100% sure I bookmarked it. Bookmarks. Just get a little insight of what I actually bookmark. Not write less code. Yeah, this one. Is that this simple React example was different in every framework. All it is, if anyone's followed my talks on reactive programming, there's basically, what I call the three primitives: signals, derivations or memos or computeds, and then reactions, the three of them. And this example basically tested the timing of all three. We have useState, which is our like stateful signal, whatever. We have useMemo, and then we have like our event handler. And essentially, using that kind of mechanism, I could kind of see the difference. And interestingly enough, they all console log different things. React, everything's in the past until everything's completed. So at that point, then we log it. And because they use micro tasks to batch everything, it's 0, 0, 0. It's like in this example, it starts with 0, and then the whole point is you update it to 1. On the next line, it's still 0, 0, 0. Vue, the reactive part of the system updates, but the side effects don't. So it's 1, 2, and then 0. Svelte, the state updates, but then the reactive system doesn't update until afterwards, like including everything else. So, and then in Solid, everything updates immediately. And from that perspective, you're kind of like, who the hell is right? This is crazy that things that look so similar, because I actually put the other implementations here. And since the dawn of hooks, things actually look really similar. Like you saw this React component, you got a couple things declared, and then you have your button with your click handler. When you look at like how this looks in Vue, it's not that different. You have your couple signals, you're computed, and then again, you got to go up here where you see your click handler, and then the code's right here. Update, like the syntax is different, but a couple signals, double, these are all the same looking things. And then it's Solid, looks a lot like React, but these are basically analogous, except their behavior is different. So this is one of the reasons when I was talking about people kind of going, oh yeah, compilation of different frameworks stuff. These are the kind of challenges and insights and thoughts kind of go into this thing, right? Like and why do these operate differently? The funniest thing about this is everyone will have an opinion, like which one's right. Like if I asked right now, I bet you chat couldn't even agree on this. We came to one realization in the end though, which I think was kind of helpful. React and Solid are actually the same. I know you're like, what, 0, 0, 0 and 1, 2, 2. At first you go, oh, they're the same because they're glitch free. They're the only ones that present a consistent model, right? If you look at it in a sense, Vue and Svelte, it's broken. If somewhere you were going that 1 times 2 equals result, in React, you went 0 times 2 equals 0. That would be true. In Solid, if you went 1 times 2 equals 2, that is also true. But for Vue, you might get like 1 times 2 equals 0, and Svelte, the same thing, depending on it. And but the difference between React and Solid is when the batching happens. In React, it just hadn't happened yet. In Solid, if I put that inside a Solid's batch command, we would also get 0. We'd also get 0, 0, 0. So just to be clear, React and Solid are actually the same on consistency, but Vue and Svelte's position are equally justified in a certain way, because Vue says, hey, your reactive system's up to date. We'll handle the side effects when we feel it's the right time. Some people think that's logical. Svelte, you might be, and for us, the longest time, we're like, oh man, Svelte's approach is just like so broken. But look at the code. Let's look at the Svelte code, for example. If you wrote this code where you went let count equals 0, and then you went count plus plus, would you expect double count to have changed? Like, if Svelte might be broken from a consistency standpoint, but it actually mirrors the behavior of native JavaScript. Yeah, let's see. Can I link to this thread in the chat? Yeah, this is another great one, and it's pretty old. Let me see if I can grab this. There you all are. You can see the discussion. It's funny. I still have the banner up for REPL Diving, but this is our conclusion. Funnily enough, was as always, is the right answer depends a little bit. We think, we decided that consistency obviously was important, but it's not that simple, because there's certain parts of the framework's design that makes you decide that. Like Vue seemed really attractive for a while, because for the average developer using it, it just kind of makes sense. It's kind of expected. There's no kind of trade-off. The problem with the React's model is when you update the count and then you read the count, people are like, what? I just freaking updated the count. Why is the count not updated? Right? Everyone knows why, if you learn React, but for a new developer, this is incredibly confusing. They're like, I updated it. Why is it not updated? Right? Most people aren't looking at their refs, so Vue kind of gets that scenario there. Because the problem with the solid approach, obviously, is if you update everything immediately, what if you have to do multiple operations? Wouldn't that be expensive? Well, if you are re-rendering whole component trees, they are. If you're doing something fine grain, maybe not, right? So, and Svelte's model kind of just like let it lay, kind of can work for it. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's much more to say about that, but that was kind of the what I wanted to show here. Right. So, okay, let's with that in mind, let's and let's go back and look at what it looks like to do some simple form stuff. I'm hoping to go and get to a little higher level here too. Looks like Dan and Dylan have already kind of had a discussion in the chat about something that I will be getting to a bit later. But essentially, here is our example, and I'm going to start with Solid because it's the most verbose version. This is not a place where Solid gets the benefit from the shortness of like terseness of language, so to speak. It's very explicit, and in this kind of case, let's face it, two-way binding is not doing, or sorry, not having two-way binding isn't like a big gift. As I mentioned, in more complicated scenarios, that verbosity is perhaps worth it, especially in systems where it's actually dangerous to have two-way binding. But here we create our signal, and because we have this tuple, this is all intentional in Solid. This kind of separation, it's actually hard to two-way bind in Solid. Like even if we made helpers for it, you'd still have to pass in two functions. Even with like a custom directive and stuff, we kind of made it sort of hard. The way out of it would have to be using compiler tricks, which we could talk about in a minute when we get over to Marco. But essentially, this is actually kind of set up in a way that it's purposely difficult. I mean, the whole idea is we have a value, and then on input we update the value. So like, yay, I mean, right. This is one of the first demos people show with JavaScript frameworks. The next one now we're going to get to two-way binding land. So we're going to look at Vue. And sorry, okay. Vue is a little bit nicer, right? Solid with all that stuff. This even shows off that we had to use a fragment to get the equivalent code. Like there are some trade-offs with JSX. I like showing this because I like a lot about the stuff about Solid's design. This is like the worst case scenario I can think of for ergonomics for this stuff. Like trying to maybe unnecessarily event handler, having to use a fragment. This is about as bad as it kind of gets when in comparison, right? There's places where Solid's ergonomics are good, but this is a place where it's much awkward. So yeah. Yeah, like knockout too. Like back then, every framework was like, wow, if you update this box, it automatically updates the text at the same time. This was like, wow, data binding. Right? Like this every demo was this demo. It's funny because all the other REPLs except Vue don't use this as their main demo anymore. But Vue did, and I was like, okay, let's just do it. My favorite topic when JS comes back. Yeah, I mean, if you call this biting you, I actually still kind of prefer the consistency, but that's a different thing. As I said, mostly because of the knowledge of the fact that I I don't think with Solid it would make sense to embrace two-way binding in its whole, so to speak, right? Because the dangers I talked about earlier, right? But yeah, we get back to Vue, and we have our V model on our message, and this time, okay, so they import their signal or ref or whatever, create the ref, and then bind the value. They use double curlies and then V model it to get to basically have the special behavior. Generally, input binding is special compared to other two-way binding because it has to do something on the value. It actually has to get the thing. It's not just a straight, like, here's the signal both ways sort of way. It has to pull the value off the event. And there's some other details that Dylan can probably tell you in more earnest than me. But essentially, you get the idea here. They use script and template to separate their code. Which probably adds more verbosity over what you'll see over the next couple solutions, but we can say hello stream just as easily here, right? And let's move on to Svelte. So we went from 13 to 10. What's Svelte? Going to be another about the same amount off? Yeah. Now we're down to 6. And we still can do our thing. Svelte, you didn't have to import the primitive, which is kind of nice, because all their lets are it. And yeah, someone's talking about the details here of Vue. I know the basics. I'm not going to pretend that I'm expert here, but I'm just trusting what the REPL gave me. This one, at least, I didn't write myself. Vue is the starting point. I'm out of the 4 frameworks here, I am the least familiar with Vue, to be fair. I spend more time with Svelte. I spend obviously more time with Marco and Solid. But you can kind of see, you just bind value. There's probably a shorthand for Vue that looks better. I actually like this a little bit nicer, just in terms of it indicating that I am binding the value. It's not, the V model thing came from Angular, and they're like, I know that it has other uses, binding a whole model and stuff, but this is kind of like, I am binding a value, right? And then finally, Marco, which is obviously the tersest of the options here. This is using the tags API, and same fun again, right? And because it's like Svelte, there's a language, you just have the lettable here, right? And then Marco uses, it's funny, you can tell the roots of some of these things here, right? Because Solid's using JSX. This is very much React. Vue is using these double handlebar type things, which was really common in the original Angular and kind of HTML templates, like the ones where you'd actually render these onto your markup, with your page load. That's where Vue had its start. Svelte actually uses more modern handlebars type syntax, and they kind of got to invent their own, which is kind of cool. So you can definitely see where Svelte's kind of very modern feeling. And Marco, this is like Pug and server templating language type thing. I know this is the symbol of JavaScript interpolation, but you know what I mean? This has that kind of feel to it, right? And in Marco, value, and then Marco takes the language thing to the extreme on this side. Instead of just using HTML semantics, they add syntax for stuff. So binding is : equal instead of just equal. And like Svelte, I really like that, because it just makes it really clear what you're doing. And yeah, so that's kind of the basic comparison here on the two-way binding. So you can see the frameworks that I personally work on are about the most opposite ends of the spectrum here in terms of what the code is like. But I think it's really interesting personally, because I love this stuff. And I think, as I mentioned with the example with the different execution timing between React and all the different frameworks and stuff, these decisions reflect the philosophy and the the being of the framework. Every framework has an identity to me. They have like a personality. And when working on Marco, we're very much kind of in tune with that personality. You gotta kind of see that perspective. Like Dylan and myself have worked a ton with React. We understand it. We understand the trade-offs of two-way binding. We struggled actually on our team a little bit. Michael was probably the first one to be kind of more pro on the two-way binding side. Me and Dylan were both like, I was kind of like, and Dylan was like, it has to be done the perfect way. Otherwise, it is terrible. Like, we're not going to accept two-way binding unless it is like has amazing capability, right? Like it does everything exactly the way we want it to. So, but looking at Marco's language, we're like, two-way binding makes sense. When you say this, it makes me think of Ember, right? Like Ember is really quite they had that let's just look it up. It's like a chipmunk or something. What? Like, do they have someone dressed up in a suit at Ember conferences? I just love it every time they can kind of style it. Look at this. This more frameworks need this, right? Yeah. Ember's great. Ember was my like I needed to do the heavy framework at one point to kind of get an appreciation for it. And for me, it wasn't Angular, it was Ember. Ember spoke to me because the way the binding stuff worked, it was more closer to fine grained, and I was like I was really into Ember for a while in the 2012 time period. So I kind of look back with this fondly. But yeah, Ember, like, oh man, just. Yes, and actually, this is a good place to talk and get into some of the nuances of two-way binding here, because I think Vue does this. I'm a bit unclear. I don't know if Svelte does this, and I would have to look at the docs. But like obviously with something like, you can always diverge with like React or Solid to like the really explicit way of wiring it. It's a pain in the ass, to wire stuff in a certain way. But like, how should I put it? You can always default to just doing everything explicitly, right? I have an example here, and I'm going to have to pull up Dev2 for a minute. So pardon me, because when we were working on Marco, we came up with a pretty good example of Controlled, which I think is right up what you're asking for Dan. And let's see if we can implement this in a few of the other frameworks to kind of get a feel for how this actually works. And actually, Dan being on the channel and being so good at Vue, you might be able to help me with my lack of knowledge in Vue specifically. Introducing the tags API preview for Marco. Not many people read this article. Not as many people I would have liked, given how crazy innovative this is when you consider that we applied the language of fine-grained reactivity on top of a virtual DOM library. That's kind of unheard of without using runtime reactivity. This is compile time reactivity on top of a virtual DOM library. But what I'm looking for here is, we had a great example here about controllable forms. Okay. And did I just do, okay. I think I'm going to jump straight to the controllable example. Unfortunately for me here, I don't get to, how should I put it? I don't get to copy and paste because these are all image things. So we're going to whip this up really quickly here, but I hope you can kind of follow here. Is, generally speaking, there's two types of approaches to form controls, right? Controlled and uncontrolled. And when you have controlled forms, it's the parent that, and this isn't just forms, it's components in general. The parent basically controls the input. It sets it. So an example of that, see, it's easier for me to show maybe using solid syntax for me personally, and because it's similar to React and all this stuff. But let's pretend we had a input component, capital P, right? And it's going to return an actual input, right? Now, we're going to have our value, which could be props.value, and we're going to have a on input, which equals props dot whatever. Let's just call it on input, and yay, our stuff still continues to work. This is what I call controlled, right? Because the parent controls all aspects of this. If the parent was like this child doesn't even have any state. If the parent was like, no, we want to limit this to only, I don't know, let's go slice 3. Did I do that right? No, I did. It's the other way around. But like that. Yeah, actually, Solid's ability to control is not quite what I wanted to do. I need to actually, yeah, this is actually a good point. I don't know that many frameworks actually handle this properly, in a sense. So if you consider this properly, because this is kind of React's thing, handle this properly. Let's see if now this will work, because I didn't set it. I have created a form now that can't be longer than five characters. Obviously, the initial state. But my point is, the parent has complete control over what's happening here, right? It is not. It's not up to the child. The child isn't even stateful. This is essentially the controlled form. The uncontrolled form is basically when you have the state on the inside, right? And you go, oh, actually, I'm gonna put this inside. And in the uncontrolled form, you might do something like initializing this to props.value, right? But you're not, like, the parent doesn't control it, right? This is essentially the uncontrolled form, right? It's doing its behavior, but the parent has no means to do anything with it. Like, this isn't an input. This isn't an input. This is input limit 5, right? Essentially, I've created input limit 5, and now obviously I need to. Oh, right. Okay. Let's just get this all wired up properly. Okay, there we go. Input limit 5, right? See how the top stays hello world, but the problem is the parent has no control, no knowledge of this. I could try and middle ground it a bit by adding like a on, kind of like an on change thing here, and then sorry, I've been using Marco a little bit recently, and then basically, you know, go, okay, on change value set message value, right? And if I do this, I could get it to call props on change with our new value as well, right? And if I do this, it does reflect back. But my point is, this is where people usually end up in the end, right? I started with controlled, then I went to uncontrolled, and then I went to this mess. And what this mess is basically hybrid of both garbage, essentially. The problem with this is, and the reason I want to bring this up is, this is where we end up most of the time. Most people naively, when they're building their components, end up with something like this, where they end up having internal state that they synchronize the external state. Like there's still a problem here, because if one message changes, it doesn't reset our initial value here. So usually what we do is we go create computed here, because the problem is if the parent, that's will sorry, eventually. But my point is, the problem with this obviously is if the parent sets the value again, nothing happens. Like what happens here is, the problem with this mess, what I'm calling this mess, is that now let's pretend the parent actually wants to do something. They want to limit it to 3 or something. So they're like, okay, I'm going to slice 0, 3, right? And we don't care. It affects their value, but the form still can do 5, right? They're stuck at 3, but the form can do 5. This is sort of this is the mess. So what do? Well, we add a create computed for solid. This is for signal synchronization, and we go create computed. And I realize this is showcasing probably what you guys might consider a weakness of solid. I don't care, honestly. This is because the truth of the matter is, this is the explicit way, right? Set message, and then we're going to use props.value and slice 0, 5, and we have to duplicate that logic. We could also, like, in theory, just go, this probably shouldn't be initialized like that. Now it's good. And now it's not even good enough with solid here, because this doesn't know. Like I just wanted to illustrate the challenge. Like if you go controlled, it was pretty dirt simple. If you go uncontrolled, also pretty dirt simple. When you go controllable, or try and go to controllable, which I'm getting at, it's actually pretty complicated, because essentially, yeah, like, yeah, why? I'm trying to get back to why. Yeah, because we also have to synchronize the field and the field stateful, and that's basically the set. I could spend a little bit more time on this to fix this, because essentially, like, the way you do stuff with uncontrollable is use refs, and we could use refs on this input as a means to manually control the value and keep everything up to sync. Okay, so this is the kind of tricky thing. Now, let's play with one of these other frameworks and see how they work in this scenario, right? I'm going to go Svelte first, because I know Svelte, so a little bit better. But let's add a input. So we need a new file here, and let's copy some of this over into our new input. We don't need message here, and we're going to export let. This is one of the kind of niceties here. And then let's bind message, manage, and change this to capital input. And then we have to import it. Svelte. Okay, so here's the first question is, oh, it's value. So it should be like this. Okay, so for the simple case of two-way binding works pretty nice. Now, I guess the question here, and actually I don't know this part about Svelte as much. So unless Dan wants to help me with Vue first here, like actually, you know what? Let's just also, while we're at it, do the same thing here. Forced uppercase is a good one. Yeah. Yeah, let's forced uppercase is probably the best one. Obviously, the simple case is pretty easy, but how does this work in Vue? In Vue, actually, it's been a while. What are the props in Vue? Like, if I have an input, maybe I'm not equipped to actually do the Vue example here, because I'm assuming that I should be able to do. Can I v-model from the outside? Like, should I be able to do this import? I don't really care about uncontrolled here. I'm trying to get the controllable. So I should be able to import input from input view. And now this needs a closing tag. Yeah, where do the props come from in the setup tag? Yeah, but you know what? This is actually going to... Yeah, non-prop input model value equals hello world on update value. Yeah, I might not be able to do Vue because I'm not good enough on this side. But the thing is Svelte? Here's a question: is Svelte just a syntactic sugar? This is probably a fair question here, because do they have a section here on two-way binding? I love these tutorials because they're so useful for this, but right, because the gist of the problem here, and maybe I'll just skip to Marco because I know how this works in Marco, and you guys can tell me if Svelte can handle it or not, or especially Vue can handle it or not. We can come back. The gist of the problem is, and I'll try this to solve it for a second, is in the controlled case, you kind of don't want the child to be stateful. You want the parent to control the state. You don't want to deal with the synchronization. In the uncontrolled case, you're fine with the child doing all the synchronization and you just want to let known. But the thing is, if you're trying to support both cases, supporting them both at the same time is a messy endeavor, because in as I said, in the controlled case or the uncontrolled case, you're fine with the child just calling its own set props and being done with it. Whereas in the controlled case, you want the parent to actually intercept it and be able to pass it back down through again. And honestly, the only piece of this equation that can make that decision is the parent. That's what it comes down to. So I'm going to do this in Marco right now, kind of show this, and I'm just going to input.marco, and then what do we do? We just kind of copy this, and this is fine, this is fine, this is fine, and then we just change this to capital input. All right, sorry. Okay, so I believe right now we're in the uncontrolled case. Yeah, we're in the uncontrolled case. It is bound, but the child isn't set up to handle it. So if we wanted to make it controlled, I think, is it all we have to, no, okay, no, it's not that. I need to see what, oh, right. Marco has an attributes tag, yeah. So that wasn't even the uncontrolled case. That was like this works completely independently case. We need our attributes tag to get ourselves our value. And like in value, okay? And then I think, see, in the uncontrolled case with Marco, or the controlled case with Marco, you would just go like this, right? You'd go in value, and yeah, this is the control case in Marco, okay? So essentially you just do this, bind it, send it through the attributes, right? And then to do the uncontrolled case, well, I mean, just don't bind it here, right? Sort of. not. I mean, obviously that's it. But let's go all the way to uncontrolled case. Actually, would have the state in here, obviously, right? So I'm going to let value, and then what I'm going to do, the uncontrolled case would be initialize it to the initial value, and then bind to value here, right? And close tag. Okay. So this would be the uncontrolled case. You can't really tell, obviously, because it looks the same, but trust me, this is the uncontrolled case. It's what I first did with Solid. I assigned it to the local state and did it. And then Marco, to make it controllable, you do this. Now it's controllable. And what controllable means is this doesn't matter too much to us, but Marco actually analyzes and sees what you do. Because if you don't bind it here, it actually handles the state completely locally. And if you do bind it here, it doesn't actually, it just forwards the state from the child, so to speak. So, or sorry, it just forwards the state to the parent. The child doesn't end up in an intermediate state. The biggest problem we had with Solid here was that these like this message and this message were out of sync, and the parent has to kind of tell the child again what to do. If it's doing fancy stuff, it has to reset the whole loop again. Where in Marco, when it knows that it's being controlled, it just this operation is the same. It just, you don't have to worry about it. And part of that is a combination of syntax sugar, right? Because there is a value change event, and the value change event, the way the binding works is in a pair, essentially. That and this is true for any of them. I'm trying to think of, did we, I guess, yeah, value change v. Let's see if I can just console log v. Do we have a console in here? This is brand new, by the way. This version of the REPL. No console for me. I mean, the real console, right? Oh, v. Duh. Cool. So what this means is we're in a controlled state right now, just as if we used binding. So if we were like v to uppercase, what is it? Was it v equals v to uppercase? And someone gotta help me with this. What was it? Why is this not coming to me right now? It's not V, it's message. We are controllable, and we've basically opted into the parent being able to do the, you know, this is like my trim example. Essentially, the parent is handling this. I don't know if this is like the worst explanation I've ever given. I'm sorry, but as essentially, what I'm getting at is the child doesn't have to go through any kind of intermediate states. This is one of the beautiful things about binding syntax. I got to give you that, is that if someone wanted to make a controllable thing, they just have to add this one extra colon on top of the uncontrolled form, and then all the different scenarios are handled for you. But the nuance here is that this essentially, this value change event is what that syntax is covering. And I think view works actually very similar. It's just basically when you write value colon, it's basically just wrapping up essentially this. But the key difference is if we just go like this here and decide to revert to something that's uncontrolled, if I added like an on click event here, click and did something like message equals hi. Okay, this still passes down. This isn't the best example. Like I'm trying to show the difference between controlled and uncontrolled behavior here, and I'm probably doing pretty poor. Being mean, move to anywhere but last character and type lowercase. You probably mean going back to this, right? Yeah. Yeah, this is what I was trying to say, that essentially sorry, this is the essentially that yeah, it looks like we don't actually have scroll position or sorry, cursor position jump. I think React, some of the VDOM libraries handle this properly. Right, but you're not going to get it in an edit scenario, because the edit scenario is the one that's a pain in the right. Yeah, exactly. It goes to the end. Yeah, same thing as solid. Yeah, cursor. I didn't do this in Vue because I didn't actually figure out Vue. How in Svelte? Does anyone know Svelte is sugar? Is there a way to intercept the bind? Yeah, no, this is true. We hit some added complexity of trying to apply this to the old VDOM, but what I'm kind of looking at here is, does anyone know? Maybe it's got to be. Let's try and do Svelte, because we showed off Marco. I might have not done the best job of getting it, but you can kind of see that by looking at how you pass the props into the parent, it automatically knows whether to route it back to local state or route it back to the parent state, essentially. So you don't have any of that out of sync things, and that's what we're dubbing as controllable. Bind. I'm looking for the bind. Why can I not find the bind? Not this. How text inputs? Yeah. Yeah, but the problem is we can do this, but those are different, right? Like on change. Well, let's just play this game. Let's go to the parent here, and parent here. If we pass down value and on change, or sorry, on change, it's not going to propagate in the same way. I don't think you can put, like, can you put an on change event on a let's just do this to start with. Like, this isn't going to wire anything up to begin with. I don't like. Actually, this is a good, also good explanation. If you've been following my reactive stuff, as far as controllable goes in Marco, real key is the let tag. It can be toggled between basically being just the state or the signal and being a computation. You know, if it's being bound, it basically it's like wiring that crate computed right into the mix automatically, which is super powerful. I don't. Someone might come back and correct me later. I don't know if Svelte actually has true interceptors, because it would have to be a special event. Like, it couldn't just be on change, because the component won't pass it through. This binding syntax would have to be syntax sugar for something. Yeah, I'm. This is one that might actually component bindings. Here we go. Use component bindings sparingly. It can be difficult to track the flow of data around your application if you have too many of them. Yeah, okay. So even these guys caution you against two-way binding, even with their safety net. That's a good point to make. Yeah, I think so too. I think that Svelte gives you a nice bind syntax, but then once you opt out, you're in the same boat as Solid, essentially. Once you actually need to do this stuff, it's you're back to handling the events yourself. So yeah, I mean, that's fine. I don't think, as I said, Vue I think is different. Maybe we can pull up some Vue docs for a second, but you can kind of see, like, the trick here that's going on with Marco is this value change is special. It's not like the input event that I'm forwarding. It's actually, it's basically Marco's binding syntax is actually just sugar for these two functions, and I'm pretty sure Vue is the same way. Vue two-way binding. Where are you, Dan, when I need you? You know all about this stuff, right? I'm familiar with vModel, but I want something else. vModel with components. Custom inputs. I love how long the hash links are. Let's vModel is the same as this. Okay. But that's, oh, right, because, okay. It's because, okay, got it. Okay, so basically, and Dan, correct me if I'm wrong here. I've hit this before, because Vue developers come and start using Solid, and they're like, why? How do I wire up events? And I'm like, you can connect them. Like you call the function, you passed in a function to it, you passed an object, a props object that has a function on it, just wire up your function, right? But Vue developers are like, oh, in Vue, the components automatically for the events. Like if you put an on event on a component, then like it's like proxying for its underlying DOM elements. So in Vue, vbind and on essentially here are like they're basically proxying it out. So when I put on this component here, oh, actually no, it's not even directly proxying. They are wiring it up themselves. Okay, that's actually not too bad. Never mind. So yeah, they're just forwarding it through. Although, do you know what this means though? This has the same problem because essentially you have to make that choice. You know, like if you want it to be controlled, do this. If you want it to be uncontrolled, don't do that. But if you want it to be controllable, you can intercept the event up here, or you can upset the event up here, but then you still have the synchronization problem of the states. I guess, yeah. One of the cool things, I guess, with Svelte, which, and I guess maybe is the same, is if you go export let and you never, is there no way to, well, I mean, yes, you can add it, make it control. That's my whole point. You can make it controllable by adding internal state and then synchronizing that internal state. You're kind of back at the solution we had to do for solid at the beginning. I guess the whole point of this exercise is to show you guys that Marco is better than everything else. That wasn't actually my intention here, but basically, two-way binding is a nice convenience syntax when you want controlled stuff. You can obviously choose to have uncontrolled stuff, but when you actually want it to be flipped, you have to manage the synchronization yourself. That's kind of probably the takeaway from this section in every framework but Marco. These are the kind of weird problems you start thinking about, though, when you're like authoring component libraries. Because like the fact that you can overwrite props is kind of convenient here. This is one boon that you have. Yeah, this is the gist of it, which means you get into this kind of weird state where you're, yeah. I mean, to be fair, the export let or writing directly the props kind of lets you get around that a little bit, but my challenge here with the Svelte example is there's got to be a way to forward events. It's not going to be in the docs, but let's put on change on here. Like, we basically have to change our syntax, completely change our approach here with Svelte once we get here, right? Like, if we want to intercept, we actually have to go back to doing that. And handler, can we do this essentially and go export let handler, and then handler. There's no, I'm just missing something here. They probably, you know what, they probably use events. They probably like have like they probably use like actual, like they have like an event thing, DOM event forwarding. Yeah, okay, so It's just, is there anything other than no, just transparent DOM event forwarding. But what if I want to make a custom event forwarding in general? Yeah, and then you have to create an event dispatcher, and then you forward the. Oh man, that's fun. Okay. We're learning stuff here. So for my purposes, I think on input is enough. How, let's read the rest of this. How did I do the, how did we forward it? Oh, we just don't, yeah, that's a clever syntax. We just don't. Yeah, that's fine. So message dot to message equals e dot target dot value to uppercase. Okay, so there's our controlled thing. But svelte syntax prevents us from doing controllable, because the second I put something here, it cuts off the outer event. I would have to forward the events myself, which is probably fine, but then you end up in the same game again, right? We have to use we have to use the event forward syntax. Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Sorry, this is so foreign to me coming from JSX. JSX is just like passive function. You're just like, whatever. This is you have to use like a separate API here to kind of like mirror some kind of event system. Yeah, I don't know how much further we want to take this particular example. Yeah, exactly. I think that's the gist of it. And if you want the source of truth to be dynamic, you have to do a lot of clever checks. I don't have it here. We actually took the Marco controllable example and re-implemented it in something like pseudo solid or pseudo react to actually see it. And we actually used pseudo solid because we're thinking fine grained reactivity. And it took us a few minutes and we figured it out. And then, but it was really weird because we had to check the state of like what was on the props to make the decision. And that check had to be reactive technically. Like, yeah, it was a little, it was quite awkward because you'd have to like conditionally create computeds. It was one of those things where we were all trying at the same time to see who could come up with the solution fast enough. It's not terribly illustrative, and I'm not sure if I really want to go there. What I wouldn't mind looking at right now, though, is unless someone wants to kind of sit on this example much more. It looks like Svelte and Vue are kind of similar, except for Vue's approach to like they've sent you to sending the events sooner, essentially. That's basically the approach that both these libraries use. They have some nice shortcut syntax, but it kind of comes down to components having their own event system, which is interesting. And requires like a kind of separate API concept. It's not that hard coming from the DOM, but it is interesting. So yeah, have I mucked up and muddled the whole two-way finding conversation? I kind of still want to go back to back to this one, but I don't know if this is actually that interesting to anyone. I basically broke Svelte by making nested reactivity. I thought we'd get back here, but the truth of the matter is, I think we've already kind of made the point here. This is more novel, I think, just to people who I'll post this in the chat for anyone who might be interested in looking at this in the future. But this is more novel than anything, honestly, because it's kind of it's basically showing how you can do terrible things with Svelte that override their two-way binding and let you do view type updates, and just it's bad. Well, honestly, I don't know. Is there anything anyone wants to kind of play with? This is I said the stream would be a little shorter today. This is kind of what I wanted to play with mostly. I didn't have a ton. I've been doing a lot of prep, so I don't know, maybe less fulfilling than some of the other streams. But if that's it, maybe we just call this one early. I was hoping I'd have some more interesting revelations here, but it looks like, you know what, I got everything here. I got one more I want to do. You know what? This one's worth doing. This is the last example probably, but do you know what I want to do? I want to take these frameworks. Let's start from scratch again, and I want to implement a custom list component with them. Okay, let's do it. It's always kind of bugged me a little bit, but let's probably, yeah. I mean, a really well thought out two-way binding thing. I think Vue and Svelte's way to opt out of it is fine, but it's not. At that point, it's just like React or Solid. You're kind of in the same boat. Thoughts with two-way binding, but the interceptor in the mutable store itself. The interceptor where the data single source is fine. The problem is if you have different use cases, and I haven't made this part particularly clear. What I mean by different use cases is like a modal component is probably the most common one in the world. If you ever like used a modal component, and the question is, who is responsible for closing the modal? Like, and if you're coming from the controlled perspective, I said we always talk about input fields, but think about this applies to any controls. If you think of the controlled thing, it's the parent that closes it, which means that it's up to the modal to go, hey, someone clicked my button, they want to close me, and you forward an on-close event. And then the parent's like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll close you by setting your open state to false. Or the parent's like, no, you have unsaved work. That's like the kind of situation where you still have this kind of controlled uncontrolled mentality, because while that's fine for some things, a lot of times when you just have like a click to dismiss modal, you just kind of are like, just let it close itself, right? Like you're like, show me a modal that's like a warning, like, hey, before you continue, be sure to know that this, potentially destructive consequences, like you're deleting or something. You're like there's a lot, or tooltip type things. There's a lot of scenarios where you're just like, just show this, and if they click X, you want to close yourself. If you design your component to be completely controlled, you always have to make a handler. You always have to make a state that reflects the change in that handler to then close the modal from the outside, or the tooltip from the outside, where maybe 80% of the time you don't need that. And the funny thing is, if you go back in time to the jQuery days, controls are almost always uncontrolled. That was the default. Everyone was used to modals closing themselves, and you do some really interesting hacks to kind of get around that and have special events and whatever. But like everything was uncontrolled. And then in the modern kind of declarative like React days, everything's controlled. But the truth of the matter is, controlled is verbose for the consumer. So controllable is this like sweet spot of being able to support both. So what I'm getting at is handling it just in the state itself doesn't account for that kind of discrepancy. Anyway, where was I? Yes, I wanted to just make a list of apples, bananas, my kids, and oranges or something. Okay, and I want to. So we're just going to make list, set list, and we're going to. I'm not even worried about. Just add a for loop. I'm going to do it in each idiomatic way for each framework here. So each list and am I returning? I don't really care. Let's just make divs. Item div item. I mean, this is uninteresting. Yay. Okay. So there we go. We created it in solid. Okay. Let's do view next. Yeah, I don't care about that. We've got our ref. I'm just going to use a ref. We don't need a ref per se, but let's just this in case we want to update it later. You know, this is fine. Let's just do that. And in our template, let's make a div, and let's what is it? V4. Or actually, it's on the template itself. Can I do it on the template itself? V4 item in list or something, and then let's make this list, and then yeah, there's two ways that view could be working, and we're going to find out which way they work right now. I've worked on multiple frameworks. Yeah, view works the way that I thought it worked. It's actually repeating. It's a repeater on the element you're on. That's what I thought. A lot of these directive-based ones use the control flow as repeaters. Okay, and then let's go into Svelte and do the same thing. Get rid of this, and let our list equal. And then probably. Yeah, I wrote the JS framework for Svelte, and my memory is just a little bit loose here. I think I did not do something right. Each. As, okay. Sorry, every DSL is a little bit different. List as item. They reverse the order of the stuff too. Not a big deal. You learn it. Some React developers get really angry about stuff like this. It's all the same, right? Let's do Marco here. What was it? List. And then what, for item of list. And then div delete item div. Okay. So we've just gone and we've created the same example in all our frameworks yet again. Yeah, so this time it's actually much more similar. It's just a signal and a for loop with a div, signal, div for, div, and finally that. Okay, so what's the exercise here? Well, the exercise now is we have to make a new component that takes the list but only shows the first 10 rows, kind of like or controls the pagination or something like that. So let's do that in Solid first. We just go function paginated. For now, I'm just going to use identity functions. I'm not going to bother implementing the logic of like limiting the stuff. I'm just going to essentially just assume that I'm just going to return the identity function essentially. So then this becomes props.each, and this becomes props.children, right? And then we just go paginated, Sweet, okay, that worked. Okay, so there we go. I just switched our for to a paginated component in Solid. Okay, let's do the same thing in Marco. And render body. Yeah, okay. So I think that's right. Dylan's still here. He can correct me if I'm wrong. But essentially, we probably need a closing tag there. Probably need a closing tag there. I think that looks right. And then what do? We change this. Oh, is it of? Not list, of. Ooh, right. Just that to list because of the JavaScript keyword. And then here we just go paginated. Paginated. Ooh, am I hitting a fun little issue with the tags API? Oh, is it this? It's a default attribute? Huh. Well, that wasn't what I expected, but I'm probably not doing something right. Oh. Good syntax, still getting used to it. Okay, but okay, so you can kind of see. We're going to continue here with Solid. I was able to just copy and change the mapping of the props pretty easily, and then in here we just literally kept the same component, just changed the component name. With Marco, had to create the new tag for like do the prop mapping here. Little bit of difference on how you handle the children, but the for loop outside stayed the same. And here we literally again just changed the tag name. Let's do this with Svelte. Okay. Okay, so what are we going to call this one? Paginated. So first thing we have to now import paginated from Svelte. from paginated.svelte. And we should copy this over to here. And just peg. And let's call this each export let each, and then export let each as item, div each item, and then in here, this becomes paginated. And then okay, I have to remember how to do this. What is it called? I'm looking for scoped slots. If anyone can see spread props, default, event forwarding, dimensions. Slot props, found it. Oh, okay. Okay. So let item equals item. And just a second. Oh, actually, no, that's not right. That's not right. Okay. Okay. Item equals item. And then we need to pass each list. Okay. All right, there we go. Actually, I kind of almost want to do one more thing here while I'm at it. Sorry, I'm changing the example on the fly a bit, but we should also add index just to make this more fun. Let's make it I+1. All right, cool. Actually, didn't need to change anything here the way it worked, so that's fine. Let's go to Marco and add the index. And let's go to Svelte and add the index. Let index, or let, probably should name it index because it's named the way this works. So we can call it I here. But if you were developing an API, you'd probably do that. And then inside here, index equals I, and this one be I plus 1. Okay, now our svelte example is up to date. Can I adjust this a little bit? Okay, so what are we doing? So I almost want to kind of multi-line this so I can actually, will this multi-line? Yeah, there we go. Little bit more readable. Okay, so I've done svelte now. I've done Marco, and I've done, let's do Vue now, the last one here. All right. If you're asking why I'm like going through this kind of silly exercise, it's interesting to me because even though pagination is kind of a funny story, but layouts and stuff hit this all the time. You're always doing conditional pieces and layouts and stuff. So having control flow, extend cross template is definitely like a super common pattern, right? So, oh man, this is interesting, isn't it? How do I actually let the parent choose the element that the v-for goes on? And Dan's already gone now, so this might actually be trickier than I was thinking, because let's just continue this for now. But obviously where I want this to go is, we import paginated from paginated and I want this to become paginated, and I want I don't know if we're going to solve this without any Vue experts in the stream. Let's look at the docs for a minute and figure out how to do this. Right, like, because so far with solid, you literally just changed the name of the tag and you were done. From the outside, obviously you had to do some mapping if you wrote the component. With Marco, you again did a little bit more complicated mapping, but again, you just changed the name of the component and it just worked. With Svelte, we had to change the control flow type to now not use each or item type things. And then we essentially had to use named values that the component provided to add this kind of let syntax to get our values in. But then this part at least stayed the same. With Vue, how do we do this? I think Vue calls these slot props. I mean, we can start authoring the internal component here pretty easily, right? The component on the inside, at least, is fairly easy to do. I mean, can we go slot? I'm sorry, this is my gap. I should have done this example when we had Vue experts still on the stream. I don't know how much time I should spend looking at this. Sorry, this is my bad. My Vue knowledge isn't good enough. See,
they're showing an example where they put the v4 on the outside on the component, but that doesn't work. That's not what we want to do here. That's not a good pattern for what we're trying to accomplish here, because we want to control the iteration on the inside. We just want to pass the data in. Like that won't work for us. Okay. I might have to leave this one. If anyone has any ideas, let's try v4 on slot. Nope. Nope. Oh, man. It's quite possible that this isn't okay. Okay. Template v slot. That's name slots. That's not what we want quite. But I think we have to use a combination of this sort of thing. Because like the two different options is you could pass children that have the v4 in them, but that's not going to help us. We want to pass these individual items. You could put the v4 on the outer component, but that doesn't do it, because then the outer component is controlling the iteration. What we need to do is be able to pass just the list in and the item definition and have the v4 on the inside. Because vslot tells it which slot, so you can go vslot default. But that's not the problem. Our problem isn't getting the template into the it's putting. Okay, I got it. Okay, so it's a little bit different. We can put a v4 on a template element. I don't know if we can put it on the top level template element, but we can definitely put a v4 on a template element, which means that inside of it, we can put a slot, right? Which then suggests that we should be able to pass a div with an item to it. I don't know how to get the item there yet. We're going to just go high, right? Okay, so far so good. Now we just need to figure out how to pass the proper slot props to it. So close. Not name slots. Dynamic slots? Dynamic slot. No, that's not. Okay. Slot scope. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So essentially, our div, I mean, this might work, but we might have to wrap it in another template. I'm thinking in order to get where we want, because it needs to have the slotted scope. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one here. Slot dash scope, name a variable, and then we have to figure out how to pass it in. Okay. To-do list. This is very close to what we're trying to do here. Okay. The only problem is it's not showing me the other side of it. Sorry, I know this is taking longer than we were hoping. Template, vslot default slot props. That's what I was looking at, but that's how I do it on the other side. No, that would be this side. That would be slot. I've lost most people now. Sorry, there's something about the slots that I'm just not quite. This part makes sense to me, but how do where do they actually pass? Yes. Like, I think everyone's left the stream at this point. Oh well. Who thought view would be the hard one to figure out? Like, there's all these abbreviation syntaxes. So like, okay, v-bind on the inside. That's it. Okay, there we go. That's the piece I was missing. item. And then maybe v slot on this side. Okay. They support destructuring is what they're saying. So if I do this, I mean, I don't need that. This is redundant, but if I do this, I did something wrong somewhere. Huh. Okay, let's try this. Let's just call them slot props like they do in the example, and go slot props dot item. Make sure I'm v-binding it properly here. Not this one. This one. V-bind colon name equals name. So maybe I missed that. V-bind name item equals item. Bang. Okay. Sorry about that. Good. I mean, Vue has pretty good docs and good. It's so easy to do stuff like this. Oh, we got to get item. We gotta pass I as well. V bind item index equals I, and then yeah, I'm thinking I'm gonna do it the long way first, just to make sure that I'm like not but let's make this a little bit more stylish. We can probably do something like a destructure here and be like index index item, and then be like index item. Yeah, okay. There we go. Thanks to people who are still here. That took, I think this example we've been working for 40 minutes, and I'm pretty sure the last 20 minutes has been Vue. Vue is not is this framework out of these ones I'm the least familiar with. So gotta be a little excused there. As I said, their docs are very helpful. But I mean, this kind of illustrated what I was thinking. And as I said, I hadn't tried this yet, but I almost wish I had the before and after, but now that we've created all the solutions, you know, this is kind of a common composition pattern, whether you're making, you know, at least for a reactive developer, whether you're trying to make like for loops or layout components, you know, you can think of things like suspense and whatnot. Like, I think this kind of stuff happens in React so much that I didn't even have an issue with putting for loops in solid or show components, because it's just like suspense, error boundaries. Once you start writing code, you just do this kind of all the time with the patterns that you use in React. But I'm gathering Svelte and Vue don't do this very often, because it's definitely like a thing, you know what I mean? Like you saw with solid, like pretend that someone else made Paginated for you. You come in, you change the name of the tag, and you're done. If you're using Marco, same thing. Svelte, it wasn't too bad, but you'd have to kind of like look and go, okay, what are the items that you're exposing? Because before you just named it whatever you want and you used each or whatever. Now you have to add these let things. Svelte's ability to just add the items on here is pretty nice. Probably supports bind syntax too. I bet you can go like bind this. No, okay, maybe I'm okay, whatever. But you going from this to this is still kind of a bit of a shell shock. This example for Vue is like no part of this we were able to keep. It just completely changed every part of it. So yeah, I definitely kind of plan ahead here. This kind of refactoring seems completely brutal in Vue. It's a little bit of work in Svelte, but yeah, I think earlier we showed where maybe JSX was clunky, but man, this is pretty brutal. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, obviously familiarity with the bindings and stuff would help, and I think the shorthands. I think I can just like do this. So, but yeah, like your whole mental model had to shift from copying like a div with a v4 to suddenly like a bunch of nested templates and destructured arguments with v slots. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, interesting. Yeah, I don't know if there's any other good comparisons people have. Everyone's been kind of quiet for a while. You can go endlessly with these REPLs. The only thing that we haven't done yet was look at the compiled output, and I don't even know. I think a quick look is under the hood is probably worth a last little bit of our time here. Obviously, I've shown solid before. Our component functions become like basically create component for, and we wrap getters around these dynamic things. And then for our actual DOM, we have this template cloning walk and some kind of effectful inserts. So that's pretty typical for us. We need to look at Marco next. Actually, no, before, yeah, we'll do DOM and then we'll do SSR after. That's a cool thing. You can actually see both sides. We'll look at the VDOM. This is probably going to be the biggest output we see because Marco's faking the reactive system in Marco 5 right now. Marco 6's output is super small, smaller than Svelte, but maybe not as small as Solid or Vue. But yeah, this is fun. It looks like the div or the is basically a bunch of commands where this looks like incremental DOM. I don't know if you've ever seen incremental DOM, but essentially it looks like it calls an open tag and a close tag, and then it calls a bunch of functions for each of the attributes, presumably to create a virtual DOM node. And if I switch to paginated, this is kind of interesting. The for loop here is literally a for loop. Which is kind of cool because map is actually less efficient than for loops for anyone who actually knows that, because you have to like map it and create the new item. So Marco actually uses an actual for loop for their for. That's cool. And look, const item of list, and then index is kind of manually put in here. But yeah, that's interesting. And then for our actual render body, this is kind of like a dynamic tag, it looks like. Okay, so that's Marco. I don't know if that makes a ton of sense. They have a VDOM, but it looks almost like incremental DOM, and then stuff like control flow is like literally compiled in as straight JavaScript, which is kind of wild. Let's look at Svelte. Svelte always takes a little bit to look at because their output's a little bit large. And I think they have a human readable version. If we go dev, yeah, this will, no, dev. This will be a little bit more human readable. Svelte creates these blocks with like C and M and P and different things. And these are all life cycles, essentially. Svelte splits your code into different life cycles. Like C is create. So you see helpers for creating the text, the element, each element one time in a row. And then here is mount. M is for mount. So they're inserting some stuff and appending some other elements. And then update is essentially a list of dirty checks. So essentially the whole component reruns and then it just like checks a flag. So it's kind of like you when you call the update function, you pass in this context, which I guess is like all the state of the component, and then like each index probably like it looks like a bitmap. Each index is like, is this state dirty or this state dirty? So you can actually kind of get a granular update here, because on the other end, it actually compiles indirect assignments. If you ever looked at Solid's way that it groups in Create Effect, it's actually very similar to this. This is kind of the shallow update when you kind of group stuff. Although it looks like, let's look at our paginated. I want to kind of see how granular we get here, because okay, each gets its own block. That's how they do it. So it has its own create, its own M, and its own P. So yeah, that's the secret to Svelte. Essentially, they kind of behind the scenes almost create their own component. Almost is a way of looking at it for the control flows. That's how they keep semi-granular, because if you batched that with the parent, it'd be really inefficient, because any like change of state would cause the whole list to reevaluate, or any change to the list or whatnot. So they get granularity, it looks like, by actually splitting it. And there's a lot of life cycles: intro, outro, destroy. It's kind of interesting. Let's get these big class objects, and then yeah, the main part, they create it, call it a fragment. They create each transition out. Yeah, so they have the life cycles, anchor. Okay. I said Marco was having the biggest output. I guess even with the VDOM marking, Svelte is still the winner on size. Paginated slots. I think this instance is actually probably the core of this component instances. Okay. Interesting. Here's a bunch of the invalidate calls. So like this is how, like, basically if each improp's invalidate, this is all their component setters. See how I was talking about how they must be using index base? It's not unlike React hooks in a sense, where they're keeping track of the index of the different like state. Like if you go export each, like they probably use 0, 1, 2, and then they use that in their compilation, and then basically invalidate with the index, which will tell you, this is the part that's dirty. So while it's not super granular, it's a very simple index dirty check kind of thing. And this is good, because I said, if you're too granular with reactivity, it's actually expensive. And in a lot of ways, what Svelte's compiling to and what Solid compiles to is very, very similar, other than in the sense that like it groups together stuff and does a shallow diff for like attributes and separates off the control flow. The only difference is Svelte does this based on explicit life cycles. It looks like it's almost like creating a component. That there's like instance where in Solid, almost nothing's created. It's just it's another reactive wrapper. It's another effect or something is essentially the difference. So it's, yeah, interesting. Each improps. There's a lot of like invalidation rules. Basically, they have no reactive system. So what you're seeing here is basically the like unwinding the reactive system into the compiled thing. That's why the components are so large. We're still not done this file, eh? Wow, yes. So it's huge, but you can kind of get an idea of how it works here. Let's look at Vue. Vue is the one I know the least about, so this one's probably going to be a little bit interesting. Okay, so we have our list and a ref. So the runtime reactivity stays the same. It looks like the setup script is kind of like the top part of Solid's thing, where we don't transform the runtime reactivity. Vue doesn't either. But the template block is a function, context, cache, create block, paginated, create element, vnode. Yeah, this looks like an optimized VDOM thing, right? They have VDOM elements in here, like kind of like React or Preact, but they also have stuff like create block. So my guess is they've isolated static, or it's not my guess, I know they've isolated static portions, but they're using helpers like this to kind of break up their VDOM structure into almost like sub-templates that they can interact with independently instead of going through the whole process of creating everything one by one every time. Let's see if paginated looks any different. Also not much code. I think Solid and Vue are pretty close here. No, Vue might actually, you can see why Vue has so little code. Mostly that its DOM part isn't DOM, so it just compiles down here to more create thing, and then they have a render list, so they have a helper for the v-for. That's interesting. Sometimes directives, have their own kind of custom code kind of handler where it's like, okay, look up the directive in the list. But it looks like in this case, for the built-in ones, Vue shortcuts it. They're like, yeah, we know that's a v-for. We're not going to bother doing like a lookup. This is one of our built-ins. And then, yeah, this is this render slot, another helper. Yeah, Vue has really done a good job of extracting literally everything into helpers so that the VDOM creation is actually quite small and quite simple. It looks like there isn't really much to it. Like very different approaches, right? To the different frameworks here. In this example, and none of them are like your traditional React hyperscript, right? Vue does have elements of that, but they have a whole bunch of specialized helpers that they import that just shortcut it a bunch. Whereas like Marco was actually kind of similar with all those specialized helpers. And sorry, it's more obvious. No, maybe it was here. But this things like the for loop are just literally for loops, which is kind of interesting. Okay, one more pass. Now let's look at what happens when we do server-side rendering. Solid. Actually, that almost happened so fast I didn't even see the difference. Huh. Okay, yeah. So in Solid, the component code stays identical with the server rendering. We just changed our template. There's some more markers for hydration boundaries. You can kind of see those kind of come in. But the biggest difference is that the DOM part becomes this single function call, SSR template, and then the expressions kind of inlined. Whereas in the client side, there's some DOM node walking and then like separate statements. But for the most part, the compiled output is not that different, other than behind the scenes, this is creating a string essentially, but it's like we just change what the template is. And then instead of cloning a nodes, this is like a string concat essentially. Let's look at Marco. HTML. Huh. Doesn't look that different from their. This one's actually has nothing to it. Let's look at the index again. Yeah, so okay, yeah. Before I said it was very incremental DOM where you saw opening tag, closing tag, and then the attributes. Now it's just out.write, I guess this is, and it's just strings. So inlining, template literal, create the string. So list there, pass in the string, for loop. His for loop is still just a for loop. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious why Marco is pretty fast on the server side rendering. There isn't like, it's like a for loop with a string concat. Okay, let's see how Svelte is these days. I think there's a compiler option for this. Generate SSR, yeah. Interesting. Well, those giant components disappear. Too bad this isn't what they can ship to the browser. Yeah, so default object render, and then there's some inline string stuff here, the items, and then how did the for loop look like? Each, prop each. So they have a helper function for each. So yeah, they just do a dirty check on the input, and then they run the helper function on each, return each. Interesting, it's a map function. Yeah. I mean, we have to look at the internal. They must use a for loop on the internals, otherwise they could lose 20-30% performance here. Maybe that is why they're a bit slower. Interesting. I'll have to look at that at a different time. More on the internals, but yeah, other than that, you see the inline escaping, similar to what Solid Marco was doing. Tag template literals, though, kind of inlining it. I wonder if Solid's approach of hoisting the static parts has any performance benefit. I think I tried benchmarking before and it was minimal, so probably not. SSR. View. Push. But marker, open, close. Their markers are similar to Solid with slash, and they're using square brackets. But it looks, I don't know if they were always this way, but it looks like Vue is also doing render to string. They just have, it's kind of like Marco on the right, they have this push function essentially, and tag template literal interpolation. So all of these frameworks don't render like VDOMs or anything on the server. It looks like they're all using string template rendering. I think I might have to go through some benchmarks and update Vue, because I'm pretty sure Vue SSR performance wasn't that good before. Although, what's this? Create vnode. Huh. Interesting. Do you think it's possible that what they're doing actually is the static parts are just a static string, but that the dynamic parts are still a virtual DOM? That feels like something Vue would do. I wonder if they actually still have a virtual DOM on the server, but they're kind of interlacing it with static strings as kind of an optimization technique. Huh. That would definitely have more overhead, but okay. Well, I think that's almost as much as I can glean off this. I don't know if anyone has any questions. This is probably more interesting to me than for any of you, but get to kill some time on stream and kind of look around at how these frameworks work. But yeah, there's definitely some interesting stuff going on in Vue. All right, I don't know. That's all I got. We're at 3 hours, like clockwork. It's funny how that works. I don't know if anyone has any more questions, but I'm pretty good here. This went longer than I expected. There's a few interesting points, but I feel this one was a little bit more dry. Sorry, I didn't have as much interesting topics prepared today, simply because of the other work I've been doing this week. But awesome to have everyone, and I think I'm going to call it a night. All right. Have a good one.